My name is Rebecca Martin. In 1979, I had a heart attack that resulted in a near-death experience. I knew that I was going to die because previously, just a few days before, I'd had a minor attack but fell out of my body, and so I wanted to be able to do it consciously. When the event occurred, I felt myself losing breath and heartbeat and began to move very fast through space. Rather than it being a tunnel, it was more like Star Trek at warp speed. But I had been taught to just not be distracted, but to pay attention to the light that I was moving toward. As I got closer to the light, I had this very strong sense of, at last I'm home. About that time, the light opened up into the shape of a person, and still radiant light, and I just dove right into it, into perfect love and peace and joy and bliss, an amazing feeling. The next thing I knew, and I don't know how long that part lasted, but the next thing I knew, I'm sitting at a conference table, a long conference table, and my wrists were resting on the table, and I could sense that there were people touching my arms. I could see their hands, different genders, different ages, different nationalities, but they all seemed like people I knew. Off to my left, down the table, about halfway, was a man who was dressed like my childhood idea of God. He had white hair, a beard, a long white robe tied at the waist, sandals, the whole thing. And he sent me a message telepathically. Rather stern, I think, because I had a rather stern idea of God at the time. I was young. And he said, "What do you want?" The next answer that I gave was, I want to know the truth. I've been struggling for a while in my life with the idea of how could there be a loving God with so much hell on earth? Well, the next thing I knew, this radiant being appeared at the end of the table. The table actually seemed to disappear into space at that point. And she was made of blue-green flames, and she spoke out loud. All you need to believe in is love. And it answered all questions. I felt very clear about everything. The next thing I know, I went on to say, then let that be my work. And then I found myself floating above my body where I had died. And I went crashing down into my body, and my heart started beating. And I started breathing, and I was back. It took me about a month, actually, to recall everything. I had short and long-term memory loss. I had been out of my body for 14 minutes. And eventually it came back, however, and I knew that I had to figure out how could I be here without despair. I went to India to spend time with my teacher, Satya Sai Baba. And in that visit, he did clear my mind and sent me back with the understanding that what I had to learn to do was to stop judging everything, everyone, myself. And that's what I've been working on ever since. It is the way that I stay peaceful. I've also noticed that there are some other changes that have gone on. Extended sense perception in a number of ways. I can see people's field, or what people call the aura. I can talk to people on the other side. I can scan bodies and get information. And I have a streaming experience with my teacher in India. So that's pretty much my experience. The last class that I had of my basic self-mastery, we got onto the subject of near-death experiences, and in a group of 12, 5 had near-death experiences. I think this is something that is becoming more available to us. Perhaps it is because there have been books written on it. People are more aware of what it actually means, and I think we're changing. I think that we are becoming more awake as a species, and so therefore these kinds of contacts, and also because they're very, most certainly they change a person. I think that I know myself, came in contact with, I think that radiant being I first saw was me. I mean, that was my own natural divine nature. That was my divine nature. And I used to think it was Jesus, you know, that was attaching it to a name. But I believe that it was my own self that I was coming in contact with. And I think that that veil between this humanness and that divine nature is getting thinner. We're having more altruism developed and more compassion. And I think those are also some of the effects that come from a near-death experience. Well, I think that in the classic peak mystical experience, there may be a gradual awakening in that process. And so it's more measured, I guess, with, oh, well, yeah, that's because I did this, or I had that drug, or I took that meditation class, or what have you. That doesn't mean that they aren't real or powerful, in my estimation. I think it's rather picking up the covers and looking in and seeing something and putting it back down again. That means that you know that it's real, that it is possible, and that you can work toward that. Whereas a classic near-death experience, I mean, the one that vaults you into this awareness, I believe that there's more presence of your divine nature, and that is incorporated in that process. I think the awakening to it is much more potent in where you're actually dead, because the link, the strong link between not just the psyche that is incorporated, but the brain, is cut off. And so you have this whole other experience that you are somebody else. And then you bring that somebody else back in. And that somebody else changes you physically as well. For myself, even though I had whooping cough and scarlet fever as a child, it damaged my heart. And other experiences that were damaging. When I came back in, I went through the process of healing. My heart was healed. So the physical body has changed. I think the vibratory frequency of the body has changed. I think the nervous system is changed. So that, in my understanding, one of the reasons why everyone is not having extrasensory perception is because the brain is primarily a filtration system. It keeps you grounded in this body to keep the body safe, so that you don't walk out in front of a bus thinking that you're, floating in space or something. And so I think that, but when we have clearly a near-death experience, something changes there.